Welcome to SkyeTeam's People First with Morag Barrett.
Welcome to this week's episode of People First. And my guest is my friend and colleague, Andrea Petrone, who is an executive coach and strategic advisor, facilitator, and speaker. He helps CEOs and other C-suite leaders in the mid-market to drive growth and performance by leading change, building transformational teams, and designing winning strategies. Prior to launching his firm, Andrea held C-suite executive roles for more than 20 years at the international level, and he's worked in 6 countries and on 3 continents, primarily in the oil and energy, industrial, and consulting sectors. Andrea also hosts the podcast, The World Class Leaders Show, and on that show, he interviews his guests and deconstructs the success of high-performance leaders, shares their stories, and teaches the most effective strategies to move from average to greatness. And who wouldn't want a bit of that? So, Andrea, welcome to People First.
Thank you so much, Morag. It's a pleasure being here today.
Oh, I am so excited for our conversation, but I start every episode with your origin story. So when you were a wee lad in Italy at elementary school, whatever you call it there, and the teacher asked you, Andrea, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your answer?
So you would be very surprised on this answer because I had 2 different answers at different stage of my young life. So one, nobody believes that, was I want to be a pope. Can you imagine the ambition at that time? And everyone, exactly that, everyone's smiling and laughing about that. But that was my dream when I was 6 years old.
Somebody has to be the Pope, so why not 6-year-old Andrea dreaming of it? Okay.
Exactly. An easy task, right? An easy goal to achieve in life. So I don't know why I had that kind of a dream. And of course, my family started to think about, my vocation and what was I turning to, which is quite interesting. And then, more, when I started to grow up a little bit more and try maybe to understand a bit better what I wanted to do, I actually thought to become someone is very different than who I am now. So I thought to become a lawyer. And I think the reason why I wanted to become a lawyer, I think because was my passion for fighting injustice. And that was when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I had already this idea of we need to do something to improve the society. And I thought at that time that being a lawyer could have been one of the answers. So that was essentially one of my first ideas. Then, as you know, as for everyone, then life takes you to a very different path when you start really growing up and understanding what's going on in the world. But that's the idea. And from then I became a scientist because I studied geologist, which is very different than what many people normally do. You're taking economics or engineering or politics science. So, the most traditional path. I decided to go for geology. I became a volcanologist. So I studied in such an amazing places in my own country because we have one of the biggest volcano, right, in Europe, which is Etna in Sicily. So I became a volcanologist. And then I became I started my traditional engineer career, regardless the title or the studies. So I work for oil energy companies for most of my times. So I've been working since then, I don't know, in probably 3 different continents, 7 different countries all over the world. And I have to say thanks to this industry, the oil energy, because it gave me a lot. Because it's not just gave me the exposure or the international experience that now I use a lot in my business, my life. But I think also the opportunity to see things in a very different cultural context and understanding why culture really matters when it comes to interaction and work dynamics with people. And I have to say that has been an incredible advantage for the profession I do now, because although since that time, then I move up my ranks, I became an executive leaders in different kind of organizations. And then I came to London in 2013 to join a consulting firm. And then early in 2019, I decided to certify as an executive coach. I studied in America. And then I started my entrepreneurial career, if you like. But if I look back to my past, I have to say this international experience, this cultural, the opportunity to understand different cultures, having worked in different countries has been incredible help now to understand exactly what's going on in the world. And as we both work for sure in, with international teams, international leaders, having that understanding, I think, is very critical.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to that, and it's the logical engineering mind of the geology and the work that you've done in the corporate environment, coupled with that human element that's going to give you that secret sauce in how you work with others. So tell me a little bit more then about how relationships and have influenced you and helped you in your career.
Well, I think we all have to say thanks to people. They really help us, going along this journey. And in my personal experience, I have to say, I didn't really have a sort of mentor or coach since early days. So, and I've been thinking a lot about this, not having maybe the luxury, right, to have someone helping you going through the major step of your career. And again, having had a very international career with very challenging context, and not just roles, but really working West Africa in countries where it's really difficult to operate, to be honest. So not having someone honestly to rely on or to ask suggestion all the time, for me, has been one of the major maybe regret I had. But that was not my fault. I just probably didn't have the chance, or maybe I should have thought more carefully in the past about having someone helping me along the way. But anyway, past is the past. I think I have the chance though to work with some amazing people at the peer level, and they really helped me because they were more experienced than me. I had a very, very fast track career, probably too fast. So I started to have executive roles very early days in my career, and I wasn't prepared at all. And that's another big lesson now for leaders right now. They are moving up the ranks, they become executive leaders, and maybe they feel they're not equipped to lead maybe their team organization because they feel they're not prepared. And I wasn't prepared, even myself. Yeah. So I think the fact that I had such an amazing colleagues, it really helped me to grow faster. I didn't have probably the other support I told you, coaching, mentoring, even from my bosses. That's one of the reasons why then I decided actually to be a coach myself, because I thought, okay, maybe there are other people that would like to have more support, to build their personal leadership, their personal influence. Nonetheless, in the last years, I have the fortune to have actually finally, a coach and mentor, but that was a little bit later in my career. So I can tell you this story. In 2011, 12, I had, one of those period of time when we have the haha moments, or kind of a, pivotal time, right, in our life, career. I thought, well, I had such a brilliant career so far, but I had the opportunity to join a small organization. That was a mistake. That was my bad choice. And it didn't work as expected. But until the time, my career was skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. So I was happy. I had a very good salary. I had a very good title. And I think I made a mistake of feeling complacent and feeling that whatever I was going to do was going to be successful, no matter what industry, organization, or role. And that was an incredible mistake I made at that time, and led me to, of my own identity. I said, no, it can't be that. They can't fire me because I'm good. Mm-hmm. And there was a pivotal moment because I realized that I wasn't so good as expected. And I was, I think, going through a journey that wasn't mine. I didn't feel that was my journey. I didn't feel that was what I really wanted to become as a person. So I decided at that time to challenge myself again for the first time after many years of good career. So that was the time that I hired a coach. And it's fascinating because I was one of those guys that thought, do I really need a coach? Is it a sign of weakness having a coach? Mm-hmm. And that's how I approached coaching at the time. It was 10 years ago. And as we know, I was completely wrong. So that experience was amazing, was an eye-opening. So I realized a lot more about myself. I discovered myself. I really realized what I really wanted to be, what I really wanted to become, and really what I wanted to do. And that was, for me, such a big moment because I built a second life after that. It was a big success, still in the corporate world. But that really taught me how important is working with a coach, with a mentor, with someone, and building relation with people that can really help you going through the journey. And I feel, many of us probably at some point we felt lonely. We felt that we were alone in that journey. And I think it's I think it's a mistake. I think we should really find a courage to start to working with others, and also building better relationship, because it's never only about you. So about stopping.
I love all of that, because you're speaking my language here. That's the theme of both my books, Cultivate and the new one, You, Me, We. And that whole idea of work is a team sport, but often we get so self-confidence overblown becomes potentially arrogance or misplaced. And I quote myself in the You, Me, We, which is your misunderstood genius. Hey, I'm a successful executive, becomes somebody else's brilliant jerk at best, or just jerk at worst, which may result in the invitation to leave or the firing. So when you started working with a coach, then what was the epiphany for you that then you were able to flex your style and get back on that leadership track?
Well, of course, we did a lot of assessments to start to try and understand a little bit more about myself and what I really wanted to do. But that was not really an epiphany. I think the epiphany really was when I realized I really stopped learning at that time. I really stopped doing that. I was a kind of a guy that I was very curious. And I think curiosity has been, as I always say to my clients, to even in my podcast, curiosity is the number one skill. I believe that curiosity is leading to a better life, because it's going to drive you to learn more, to understand more, to listen more, etc., etc. I realized that was the epiphany, that I wasn't learning anymore. I stopped learning at that time. And that is the reason why I stopped winning. Now, it's not just stop winning at work. I was stopped winning for myself. I wasn't winning as a person in my big life plan. And I think that was a big game changer, because after this, one of the action I took after working with a coach was going back study. So I got my MBAs. I started reading one book per week, and I still have that practice and that habit right now. So I don't stop that. So that was a major change, because I really became more curious again, more enthusiastic about discover things, and learning became an addiction at the time, which is something that's honestly I'm proud of that.
Oh, I love that. In fact, at the back of my mind, I'm listening deeply and thinking, ooh, a book a week. Now that would be a good habit for me to get back to. I used to devour books, but I allow work to encroach on that. So you've sown a seed. Watch this space, Andrea. So as you work with these executives and the leaders in your coaching practice, then what challenges are you helping them to resolve versus solving for them? And I'm curious to what extent has the pandemic, because you launched your coaching practice during the pandemic, what impact has that had on the leaders that you're working with?
Yeah, well, that's such an important question for me, because first of all, as many, I started to coach primarily individuals on one-to-one basis, as probably 99% of coaches, that's what they do. You start working with people that and that's how you grow your practice. However, very soon I started to get involved in very, very complex projects. And that was, I think, it gave me a couple of indications. One was that my previous executive business experience in very challenging context maybe resonate a lot with my target audience, the client, the CEOs, and the C-suite, because they are all facing such incredible, challenging time right now. And that was even before the pandemic, because change is now not just necessary, is on the top of agenda of every leaders. How we can drive change. We need to change business model. We need to change the way of working. That was even before the pandemic. The pandemic has accelerated incredible, the speed of change, but the change was already there. So in other words, what is happening right now in my world, I'm working in many very interesting change initiatives. So helping leaders to lead change. And again, normally is a cultural changes, because there is a reason why they need to change the internal behaviors, either because they're acquiring other companies. So I'm pretty much involved in M&As, for example, but also in terms of developing the organization internationally. So you start working with people, they have a very different culture, and there is a risk of cultural dilution when you start growing as a business, right? But also changing in terms of way of working, transformational initiatives, organizational structure, processes, and finally, whatever change is required after you develop new strategy. So I read an interesting, and I'll come back to the pandemic, how that impacted all this work. But just to give you an interesting data that was reported by one of the large consulting firms, they made research and they said that 75% of CEOs, they expect to change the business model in just the next 3 years.
Wow.
It's massive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that the change is there. Every single day, CEOs and leaders, they are facing change as they move on in the organization. Again, is a product, is a service, is their positioning, the strategy, is how they grow, is how they squeeze out. So it's everything is about change. Now, what happened with pandemic is that it clearly had a strong impact, a very big impact on the way of working. So the online world, that's one element, but also many other things that come to that. But funny enough, one of the largest projects I did actually at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020 during the lockdown, and that is still one of my most challenging projects I led as a coach, because I work on such a big digital transformation change initiative. But what happened, Morag, which is quite interesting. So I've been able, I'm quite proud of that. I have to say, but I've been able to lead and facilitate a team of 25 people working only online during a major digital transformation project.
Wow.
And that is massive because, that was, by the way, that was a project that was delayed, and the client spent 4 or 5 years without getting results pre-pandemic. So imagine what expectation they had of working with me on a project like that, just online during pandemic. I think was kind of a last resort, and they tried, and I think it worked. But because I think I've been able to leverage the online world and making sure that people can build trust in a very challenging context where actually trust was low, motivation was super low, because no one wants to be associated with that kind of project they're failing. So trust was down, motivation was essentially at the bottom of that. People were disconnected, were disengaged. So imagine the work that we did in order to rebuild the level of engagement, momentum, but also then identify new strategic priorities to make this project successful. And it went incredibly well.
Yeah.
And that is an incredible learning, because it proves that you can work online, you can be effective on teams working online, and you can run large change initiatives even if you don't meet one-to-one in person.
So there's the logical side of change, and then you talk there about the trust, the connection, and how we collaborate in a two-dimensional world. And I know it is possible. My team's been virtual for 15 years. However, many of my clients are struggling with a similar scenario of people feeling disconnected.
Yes.
And we say yes on the camera, we hang up and we leave the meeting. Oh, look, magic, it made me vanish. We leave the meeting thinking we've got agreement and understanding of what happens next, and we haven't. So what are for the people listening to this episode, Andrea, what are some of the tactics then that you introduced that nurtured and regained the trust of those 25 leaders? What did you do on that side?
Yeah, which is probably the biggest challenge that you really face when you work with teams. So for building trust, there are different ways to do it. But I think what I experienced the first hand was going back to the basic. So, and there are two basic here. So one is making sure people, they really know each other. And it sounds banal. It sounds something like, we know each other. But no, they don't, because most organizations, they stay at a very superficial level when it comes to building a relationship. I know you for the role that you have. I probably know a little bit about you as a person, but that stops there. So I really had them to go deep and try to understand better each other. So at a personal level, but also in terms of what were the weaknesses and how they, for example, in very, very practical way, how they prefer communicating with each other, how they're making decisions. what are the things that are happening in their own world. So you need to have this very open, transparent conversation about the personal challenges and personal situations. So that is number one, and that's to me super important. And I've been doing this for all the teams I led as well, especially after M&A. So people that have been integrating, working together just remotely in the last couple of years. So they meet maybe with me for the first time face to face. Nowadays possible, of course. So that's number one basic. The other basic is always going back to the why, to the purpose. Mm-hmm. Why we work together, why our work matters to people. And when you're able to bring them back to that question, everything changes. You see the energy in the room, either it's online, offline room, change completely, because people feel reconnected with the why they are really working together. Mm-hmm. And when you're able to do that, then it's much easier to start building trust and other things along the way, like, maybe setting new values, new behaviors, defining new ways of working together. That's easier. It gets easier when the trust is in place. There is a psychological safety too as well. So giving space, people, as I said, in the first basics require people to open up, right? So you have to give them the space and the safety to speak. So you have to work on the safety, on psychological safety, and then you have to work on the purpose. If you're able to combine these two elements, wow, teams start working together as magic.
So I know on your website you have your world-class leaders assessment, and you use that as part of your coaching practice. And within it, it provides insights around the 5 dimensions, of a world-class leadership. So clarity, performance, leadership, influence, and relationships. Topic close to my heart. But you mentioned earlier about curiosity and learning. So I'm curious, for you, of those 5 dimensions, clarity, performance, leadership, influence, relationship, which is the one that you are paying particular care and attention to here in 2022?
Well, they're all important. That's the reason why I assess them, of course. But if I need, if you want to try to rank them, I think the clarity comes always first, because if you don't know where you're going, where you really want to become, is impossible to do any follow-up work. Mm-hmm. So clarity is always part of the first step. And without that, it's really difficult going forward. But if I need to choose one of the others, I will go for influence. Mm. Because I believe that we are not building enough influential leaders out there. And I was speaking with a client earlier this morning, and is a president. He was giving me a review and a feedback about one of these guys, and he said, "I think that is his words." He said, I think this person is amazing. However, he's not able, or he hasn't been able yet to build his influence in order to build his awareness and be more visible in front of the top leadership team, the CEOs in the first tier. So being able to be influential in the organization in a world where complexity is high, where there are all these change initiatives, all uncertainty, and then people working remotely. If you're not visible, and if the people don't see what you think, they don't know what you think, and if you're not able to stand out, you will be unfortunately forgotten. Mm-hmm. So, and that's that's the best way out to not just survive, but really thrive in an organization. Because if you really want to build an executive career, you must be visible. So we do, with 95% of my clients, we do a lot of work on the influence level. So how to, first of all, what are the principles of influence, but then how to understand the stakeholders. And so we do a lot of work on stakeholder mapping, understanding what they think they want, what they expect. And finally, how to, which is probably the most important element of influence, how to be prepared. Too many high-stake conversations in organization that are happening when people, unfortunately, are not prepared enough for that conversation. Mm-hmm. So they go in with positivity, motivation, but they don't have a plan. They have maybe an idea to propose, to sell, but as soon as they get the first objections, they go back to where they were. Mm-hmm. And they lose motivation, they lose energy, and they lose credibility too. So we do a lot of work, especially with role play, for example, of trying to living that conversation in a way that become very effective when they happen in the real time. And that's, I think, for me, is one of the most important elements nowadays.
What's the one piece of leadership advice that you wish you'd learned earlier in your career?
Well, it I think has to be around using more empathy and using less power. And I think in my first life, before I got to the moment when I understand I was doing something wrong, I think I started to have that. I wasn't arrogant, never been arrogant, but trying, putting the power on the top of everything, because I'm there. So probably, my opinion, my idea matters more than yours. That was such a big mistake I did at that time. So I think that is very important. So be more empathic and use less the power, the position of power to get people follow your ideas and get mobilized. I think that is the number one thing. And probably the other thing which goes with that is the power of teams. Now that I've been working a lot with teams, I realize that teams are not a collateral damage, as I say, but teams are the best way, probably the most important way for leaders to be successful. If you don't have a great team, very, very hardly you will become successful as a leader. Yeah, and sometimes people see lead teams like, yeah, we have a team. I have a team, but I have my own agenda. That's wrong.
Yeah, it's the solo sport again. There's an African proverb that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Absolutely.
And I think that sums it all up. And as we said earlier on, work is a team sport. Well, Andrea, I appreciate you sharing some of your career journey today. And how can those who are listening and watching this episode learn more about you and your coaching practice?
Well, thank you, Morag. So, two ways. So one is LinkedIn, because I'm very active there. So I post every day, so you can connect with me and we can have a conversation there. And also, of course, on my website. So it's www.andreapetrone.com. And on there, they can take the free assessment, the one that you mentioned, so that is people that can understand where they are in the leadership development journey. But also, I put a lot of stuff there. So there is my podcast as well that you mentioned, the World Class Leader Show. So I recommend following and listening to the episode because we have amazing speaker. And more, as we agreed, I'd be happy to have you there too. So we have best-selling authors, we have scientists, we have corporate leaders. So it's a very, very interesting set of people. So the podcast is there. We record every week. So there are all episodes, but also we write a blog article every week about the episode. So there is a lot of stuff there. If people want to learn, they want to get a little bit, a bit of motivation, but also they want to improve their skills, understanding where they are. And also there are some case studies of my work with clients if they're interested.
Well, Andrea, thank you for sharing some of your insights and learnings, the highs and lows of your leadership journey. I appreciate you, and I'll make sure all of that information is in the show notes around this episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Morag. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for joining Morag today. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. If you learned something worth sharing, share it. Cultivate your relationships today when you don't need anything before you need something. Be sure to follow SkyeTeam and Morag on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any ideas about topics we should tackle, interviews we should do, or if you yourself would like to be on the show, drop us a line at info@skyeteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and remember, business is personal and relationships matter. We are your allies.